not come to offer any prepared remarks at this hearing. I am instead attaching my testimony. It is the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the SR 1.5, which was released on October 8th, 2018. I am submitting this report as my testimony because I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists. And I want you to unite behind the science. And then I want you to take real action. Thank you.
Tack så mycket.
My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of Climate Justice Now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you. I said I wanted you to panic. I've been warned that telling people to panic about the climate crisis is a very dangerous thing to do. But don't worry, it's fine. Trust me, I've done this before, and I can assure you it doesn't lead to anything. And for the record, when we children tell you to panic, we're not telling you to go on like before. while at the same time forests like the Amazon are being slaughtered at an infinitely higher rate. Planting trees is good, of course, but it's nowhere near enough of what is needed, and it cannot replace real mitigation and rewilding nature. And let's be clear, we don't need a low carbon economy. We don't need to lower emissions. Our emissions have to stop if we are to have a chance to stay below the 1.5 degree target. And until we have the technologies that at scale can put our emissions to minus, then we must forget about net zero. We need real zero. Because distant net zero emission targets will mean absolutely nothing if we just continue to ignore the carbon dioxide budget that applies for today, not distant future dates. If high emissions continue like now, even for a few years, that remaining budget will soon be completely used up. The fact that the USA is leaving the Paris Accord seemed to outrage and worry everyone, and it should. But the fact that we are all about to fail the commitments you signed up for in the Paris Agreement doesn't seem to bother the people in power even the least. Any plan or policy of yours that doesn't include radical emission cuts at the source starting today is completely insufficient for meeting the 1.5 or well below 2 degree commitments of the Paris Agreement. And again, this is not about right or left. We couldn't care less about your party politics. From a sustainability perspective, the right, the left, as well as the center have all failed. No political ideology or economic structure has been able to tackle the climate and environmental emergency and create a cohesive and sustainable world. Because that world, in case you haven't noticed, is currently on fire. You say children shouldn't worry. You say, just leave this to us. We will fix this. We promise we won't let you down. Don't be so pessimistic. And then, nothing. Silence. Or something worse than silence. Empty words and promises which give the impression that sufficient action is being taken. All the solutions are obviously not available within today's societies, nor do we have the time to wait for new technological solutions to become available to start drastically reducing our emissions. So of course, the transition isn't going to be easy. It will be hard, and unless we start facing this now, together with all cards on the table, we won't be able to solve this in time. In the days running up to the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum, I joined a group of climate activists demanding that you, the world's most powerful and influential business and political leaders, begin to take the action needed. We demand at this year's World Economic Forum participants from all companies, banks, institutions and governments immediately halt all investments in fossil fuel exploration and extraction, immediately end all fossil fuel subsidies, and immediately and completely divest from fossil fuels. We don't want these things done by 2050, 2030 or even 2021. We want this done now. It may seem like we are asking for a lot, and you will of course say that we are naive. But this is just the very minimum amount of effort that is needed to start the rapid sustainable transition. So either you do this, or you're gonna have to explain to your given up. On the contrary, they seem to understand the fact that we need to change more than you do. I wonder, what will you tell your children was the reason to fail and leave them facing a climate chaos that you knowingly brought upon them? That it seemed so bad for the economy that we decided to resign the idea of securing future living conditions without even trying? Our house is still on fire. Your inaction is fueling the flames by the hour. And we are telling you to act as if you loved your children above all else. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta, for those stirring and provocative words and for your leadership on this issue. I am going to...
Bonjour, je m'appelle Greta Thunberg et merci pour l'invitation. Thank you all for coming here, by the way. I have some good news and some bad news regarding the climate emergency. I will start with the good news. The world, as a small number of people have been saying lately, will not end in 11 years. The bad news, however, is that around the year 2030, if we continue with business as usual, we will likely be in a position where we may pass a number of tipping points, and then we might no longer be able to undo the irreversible climate breakdown. A lot of people, a lot of politicians, business leaders, journalists say they don't agree with what we're saying. They say we children are exaggerating, that we are alarmists. To answer this, I would like to refer to page 108, chapter 2 in the latest IPCC report. There you will find all our opinions summarized. Because there you find our remaining carbon dioxide budget. Right there, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees, we had on January 1st, 2018, 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide left in our CO2 budget. And of course, that number is much lower today. We emit about 42 gigatons of CO2 every year. At current emissions levels, that remaining budget is gone within roughly 8.5 years. These numbers are as real as it gets. Though a great number of scientists suggest that they are too generous, these are the ones that have been accepted by all nations through the IPCC. And not once, not one single time have I heard any politician, journalist or business leader even mention these numbers. It is almost like you don't even know they exist. As if you haven't even read the latest IPCC report on which the future of our civilization is depending. Or maybe you are simply not mature enough to tell it like it is. Because even that burden you leave to us children. We become the bad guys who have to tell people these uncomfortable things because no one else wants to or dares to. And just for quoting and acting on these numbers, these scientific facts, we receive unimaginable amounts of hate and threats. We are being mocked and lied about by elected officials, members of parliaments, business leaders, journalists. What I really would like to ask all of those who question our so-called opinions or think that we are extreme, do you have a different budget for at least a reasonable chance of staying below the 1.5 degrees of warming limit? Is there another intergovernmental panel on climate change? Is there a secret Paris Agreement that we don't know about? One does that not include the aspect of equity? Because these are the numbers that count. This is the current best available science. You can't simply make up your own facts just because you don't like what you hear. There is no middle ground when it comes to the climate and ecological emergency. Of course, you could argue that we should go for a more risky pathway, such as the alternative of 580 gigatons of CO2 from January 1st, 2018, which gives us a 50-50% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees. That amount of carbon dioxide will run out in about 12 years of current business as usual. But why should we do that? Why should we accept taking that risk, leaving the future living conditions for humankind to a 50-50 flip of a coin? 420 gigatons left of CO2 to emit. And now that number is down to less than 360 gigatons. And please note that these figures are global and therefore do not say anything about the aspect of equity clearly stated throughout the Paris Agreement, which is absolutely necessary to make it work on a global scale. That means that richer countries need to get down to zero emissions faster, so that people in poorer parts of the world can heighten their standard of living by building some of the infrastructure that we have already built, such as roads, hospitals, electricity, schools, and providing clean drinking water. And because you have ignored these facts, because you and pretty much all of the media to this very minute keep ignoring them, people do not know what is going on. If you respect the science, if you understand the science, then this is it. 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit on January 1st to have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, according to the IPCC. In the Paris Agreement, we have only signed up for staying below 1.5 to 2 degrees of temperature rise. And that, of course, gives us a bigger remaining carbon dioxide budget. But the latest IPCC report shows that aiming instead for below 1.5 degrees would significantly reduce the climate impacts, and that would most certainly save countless human lives. This is what it's all about. This is all that we are saying. But I will also tell you this. You cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis, without seeing the full picture. You cannot leave the responsibility to individuals, politicians, the market, or other parts of the world to take. This has to include everything and everyone. Once you realize how painfully small the size of our remaining carbon dioxide budget is, once you realize how fast it is disappearing, once you realize that basically nothing is being done about it, and once you realize that almost no one is even aware of the fact that carbon dioxide budget even exists, then tell me, what exactly do you do? And how do we do it without sounding alarmist? That is the question we must ask ourselves and the people in power. The science is clear, and all we children are doing is communicating and acting on that united science. Now political leaders in some countries are starting to talk. They are starting to declare climate emergencies and announcing dates for so-called climate neutrality. And declaring a climate emergency is good, but only setting up these vague, distant dates and saying things which give the impression of that things are being done and that action is on the way will most likely do more harm than good. Because the changes required are still nowhere in sight. Not in France, not in the EU, nowhere. And I believe that the biggest danger is not our inaction. The real danger is when companies and politicians are making it look like real action is happening, when in fact almost nothing is being done, apart from clever accounting and creative PR. The climate and ecological emergency is right here, right now. But it has only just begun. It will get worse. 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit on January 1st, 2018 to have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise. And now that figure is already down to less than 360 gigatons. At current emissions levels, that remaining budget is gone within roughly 8.5 years. In fact, since I started this speech, the world has emitted about 800,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And if anyone still has excuses not to listen, not to act, not to care, I ask you once again, is there another intergovernmental panel on climate change? Is there a secret Paris Agreement that we don't know about? One that does not include the aspect of equity? Do you have a different budget for at least a reasonable chance of staying below 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise? Some people have chosen not to come here today. Some people have chosen not to listen to us. And that is fine. We are, after all, just children. You don't have to listen to us. But you do have to listen to the united science, the scientists. And that is all we ask. Just unite behind the science. Merci.
UNICEF's executive director said, quote, under a worst-case scenario, the global number of children dying before their 5th birthdays could increase for the first time in decades. We must not let mothers and children become collateral damage in the fight against the virus.
Our next guest, Greta Thunberg, recently gave $100,000 she had received for her climate change activism to UNICEF to help protect kids from the pandemic. She's also helping raise even more money for UNICEF. She recently revealed she believes she may have had coronavirus after returning home from working in Europe. She said her symptoms were very mild, and her father, who had traveled with her, also got sick. We spoke to Greta Thunberg earlier this afternoon. Greta, you and your dad both got sick after traveling in Europe, I understand. I know you isolated yourself from your family. What was that like?
Well, I mean, first of all, we still haven't gotten tested because here you don't get tested unless you're in need of medical help. So of course I don't know if I've had it, but I isolated myself anyway, and because it is the right thing to do, we will need to take these precautionary actions and do our part in supporting society. And well, I haven't been I'm the one who can least complain about this because I haven't. So I'm very grateful that I haven't been affected by this in a way that many people have. But yeah, it was just the obvious thing to do, the only right thing to do.
I'm curious, Greta, you've been in isolation then for some time, I guess, at your apartment there in Stockholm. What has life been like for you?
Well, I'm not completely isolated. I can still go outside and so on. And in Sweden, the situation is maybe a bit different from other countries, maybe in the US. But so yeah. But of course, I have been almost only in my apartment, which have been well, I can still do things from home, so I can't really complain. So I've been doing things that I before didn't have time to do. So I was very lucky.
You have millions of young people who follow you online, and I know you've been talking with them about taking this virus seriously. Your symptoms, whether you had COVID or not, the symptoms you had were very mild. You were saying milder than other times you've been sick. But one of the points you made, I was reading on your Instagram, is that kids should take it seriously because not only could there be underlying conditions, but also even if their symptoms are very mild, it's still possible to infect family members.
Yes, exactly, and that's why I decided to post about it, to sort of spread the information that many people don't even notice that they have symptoms, and then they might spread the virus without even knowing it. And there, especially we young people have a very big responsibility because we aren't usually the ones in the most risk. We might not experience the symptoms as bad as many others. So we have to be extra careful because our actions can be the difference between life and death for many others.
You were awarded a $100,000 grant from I believe it was a Danish foundation, and you were donating that $100,000 to UNICEF to help protect kids from the fallout of this pandemic. And I know you're raising even more money for UNICEF, and I know another organization has done a matching grant on your $100,000. How do you see that money, or how do you hope that money is going to be used?
Well, first of all, I did that, and we have launched a new campaign to help support UNICEF during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is because during this crisis, during any crisis, it is always the most vulnerable people who are hit the hardest, and that is children, especially in the global south, in people in the poorest parts of the world, and especially people living in conflicts and refugee camps.
Because there's so much focus on coronavirus, there's a lot of kids around the world who may die of things that are very treatable, but because medical systems are overwhelmed, it's going to impact children in ways that a lot of people don't really anticipate. Even all the schools shutting down, for many kids, that's their primary source of a nutritious meal.
Yeah, and sanitation, and I mean we're talking about washing our hands and staying home, but I mean for many people in the world, they do not have access to clean water or sanitation, to soap, and they don't even have a house to stay home in, and it's very hard for many to keep social distancing, and we have to. That's why we need to help the people who are most vulnerable to this crisis in ways that we might not think about here in the global north, especially people in the global south.
And I have to say as well, I mean, Anderson and I have traveled around the world and seen the amazing work UNICEF has done in various places. I mean, it really is a terrific organization. Children's Emergency Fund, I mean, for situations like this. I do want to ask, I mean, the thinking early on, as you know, Greta, was that this virus largely affected adults, but we are learning more and more about how this can affect children as well. I want you to listen to something Dr. Anthony Fauci said.
Children presenting with COVID-19 who actually have a very strange inflammatory syndrome very similar to Kawasaki's syndrome. I think we better be careful if we are not cavalier in thinking that children are completely immune to the deleterious effects.
So I don't know if you had heard that before, Greta, just this similarity to Kawasaki disease. But when you hear that, I mean, how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel like it's more frightening, that there's more of a mystery? What do you think?
Well, I mean, of course, that is very true. It's sort of a myth right now that children are not being affected by this virus, and that is of course very wrong. Children both do get this disease and they also spread it onto others. So we need to be very careful that this misinformation that it doesn't affect children becomes mainstream. We need to make sure that people understand that this also affects children.
One of the things I've seen you talk about online too is just how important it is to listen to experts and listen to science. And this is a time when, I was not a very good science student when I was in school, but this is a time, it seems, that the global scientific community is so critically important, and we're really seeing just how important it is to follow science.
Yes, exactly, and I hope that we can see now the scientific community are stepping up, and they are speaking up more than they're done before, because obviously this is a crisis that will require the scientific community to speak up, and I hope that people really, it feels like science is getting, the role of science is changing now. It's becoming more, people are starting to realize that we are actually depending on science and that we need to listen to scientists and experts, and I really hope that that stays, and that also is for other crises such as the climate crisis and the environmental crisis, that we actually understand that we have to listen to the scientists.
Well, Greta Thunberg, we really appreciate your time and all the work you're doing with UNICEF, and we'll continue to follow that. We wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.